Hello and welcome to Stop Doing That, a podcast about the people and things that had to, in one way or another, be informed that it is time to stop. My name is Andrea, pronouns she and her, and with me is.
John. Hello, my name is John. I am the author of the What Happened Here series, a series of books about terrible things that have happened in history. Before we get started today, I would like to suggest we have a moment of silence for Spirit Airlines. Okay, that's enough.
Alright, that's enough silence.
Yeah, that's enough. Plenty enough silence. Go on it. Go on.
When writing these episodes, I do try to avoid cribbing just wholly from the Wikipedia notes. But the Wikipedia notes are really like the most succinct and like only form where all of this information is actually brought together in one place.
That is the
Um,
difficult thing because I don't want to cite Wikipedia articles, but sometimes that is the only place where I can find certain pieces of information or sources or whatever.
yeah, I do try to go into like their source notes and track back from the sources when getting information, but like today we're gonna talk about some naval nonsense and one of the more unique ventures during the Second World War. Today, we're going to talk about the Q ships of the United States Navy. So, first, we really have to define what is a Q ship? Well, a Q ship is a cargo or passenger vessel that has been refitted from its civilian role to that of a warship. The explicit purpose of the Q ship is to be a trap for the enemy. It is to sail in convoy with other cargo ships, and should the formation be attacked, the Q ship goes to action stations, runs out the guns, and fights off the enemy. Once the enemy has sunk or retreated, the Q ship then replaces the disguise and slips back in among the convoy vessels. Though the role of the Q ship should not be confused with the aims of a merchant raider or auxiliary cruiser. Unlike the raider, a Q ship is not meant to seek out the enemy's merchant shipping for destruction, nor like the auxiliary cruiser is it expected to provide supply and relief to actual warships. The Q ship would see a flash in the pan appearance during World War One, where they were of moderate usage and moderate success. First designed by the British Admiralty and stationed in Queenstown, Ireland, this is where they gained the Q designation. They would lead to an increase in underwater torpedo attacks by German submarines. Most of the previous attacks occurred on the surface, with U-boats occasionally ordering merchant ships to surrender and abandon ship before sinking. This period during World War One was generally stated to be the more gentlemanly form of attack, though it's warfare and there's really nothing gentlemanly about it.
There's nothing gentlemanly about having a large bullet pass cleanly through the head of a British teenager who doesn't know why he's here.
Very true. It is also notable that this is where Q Branch from the James Bond franchise gets its name, because they were a group specializing in seemingly innocuous devices that, would conceal a useful or deadly tool for the spy.
So I'm
So,
trying to just so I understand what these are. They're like normal ships that are put among warships and they're supposed to sort of look like normal ships, like kind of throw the enemy off, and also to bring supplies and stuff.
Well, let's just get into our first example here, and I think it'll all become a bit clearer.
Okay, all right.
So when we decided to, film the sequel to World War One, in 1939, with the United States finally appearing on screen in 1941, um, the need for Q ships returned, with a lot of U.S. Navy fleet elements being transitioned to the Pacific to replace losses from Pearl Harbor, and with Axis submarine flotillas operating along the U.S. eastern seaboard, there was a need for these Q ships to return. And we'll start from the ship that I am going to consider as the most successful of the six converted ships that we will talk about today. This is a bit controversial, as, like I said, this is technically the most successful. There are several others in this episode that we could consider more successful, but we'll get into them as we go. We're going to start with USS Atik, AK-101. A brief note on U.S. Navy hull classification code, because when the hell else am I going to talk about it? All vessels in the United States Navy are issued a letter code that is to designate the role of that ship. This ranges from 2 to 4 letters, depending on the era and the specificity of the ship's role. Some of these are relatively well known. I think just about everyone knows that the um, alphabetical code BB stands for battleship. In this case, AK is dry cargo ship. This is a cargo ship meant for dry goods, with A standing for auxiliary. During this episode, you'll also hear the codes AO for fleet oiler, PYC, that is patrol yard, with I believe C standing for coastal, and IX, unclassified miscellaneous unit. USS Atik would be laid down in March of 1912 as the steamship SS Carolyn, alongside her sister, the SS Evelyn, which would be later converted as USS Styrian AK-100. As the Carolyn, it would see a brief period of non-military armed service. Um, During World War One, she would be armed with a single 76 millimeter 3-inch naval gun and one 127 millimeter 5-inch naval gun, which were operated by a crew from the United States Navy, though the ship itself remained under private ownership. Um, at the end of the war, she was returned to the civilian market as, again, a dry goods cargo ship. And she would be disarmed and bought by the Bull Line, which would operate her through the interwar period, moving dry cargo. Up until the United States entered World War II. In the months preceding the war, the United States government had expressed direct interest in the purchase of both the Carolyn and the Evelyn for use within the Navy. Again, mostly just to carry dry cargo. You can actually see a picture of USS Atik here in the notes. This is actually taken from the deck of her sister, USS Asterion. I will also note that because these ships have two names, I'm going to be using their government-given military names. I will not be further referring to them by their civilian names. So USS Asteria, or USS Atik, excuse me, would commission into the United States Navy on March 5th of 1942. She was converted, she was taken from this dry goods cargo ship and now fitted with four 102 millimeter 4-inch naval guns, likely repurposed from old destroyers that the Navy had deemed obsolete, alongside four 50 caliber machine guns, four 30 caliber machine guns, and six depth charge projectors for use against submarines. She would be fitted with the acoustic equipment necessary to detect and hunt submarines, and to theoretically slow her sinking in the event of an attack. Her holds would be filled with what is known as pulpwood. Think of it like the material used in like particle board or plywood before the glue was added. This decision is noted as a bizarre one because compared to other ships that were being used by the Navy and um, just general common sense, it was weird that they chose pulpwood because it's notably highly flammable when dry
Oh
and
God.
really prone to rapid rot when wet.
What's the purpose of having them sink slowly? Is it just to get like so be like a further distraction?
Um, it's in so we'll get into the Navy's actual tactical thoughts about these vessels here in a minute, but it was in theory that it would either give the crew time to fight the enemy so that they were no longer under attack, or to abandon ship before the vessel went down. Because notably, all of the ships we're going to talk about here are older vessels, which, in the event of an attack, would sink more rapidly than modern vessels of the 1940s.
Okay. Alright, I think I understand then.
So, is the role of this vessel a bit more clear now?
A bit. It's supposed to be like it's sort of like a dual purpose thing that like I guess it sounds like they do carry some supplies, but also just that they it's like a mind game kind of thing. Like if
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a mind game and a trap
okay.
because if one cargo ship shows up sporting a whole bunch of guns, it drops the disguise and starts firing a whole bunch of weapons. You really don't know which other ships might have all of these hidden weapons, and thus
Yeah.
makes submarine attacks a bit harder.
Yeah, it's sort of
Um,
it makes them fear every single boat they come across because they could be one of
exactly.
these. Yeah. All right.
Following her commissioning in March of 1942, USS Atik would depart from her sister for mid-Atlantic operations. Her orders being that she would sort of lay about in coastal waters, communicating under her old identity as the Carolyn, and just sort of waiting for U-boats to show up. As I mentioned, we can get into like what the Navy's expected tactics were here. The belief was that a U-boat commander would fire one torpedo, and after either missing or failing to sink a relatively old freighter, and not wanting to waste a second of a highly limited supply of torpedoes, would surface to finish the kill using the submarine's deck-mounted gun. Um, it would be at that point that the Q ship would drop the disguise and commence firing on the submarine once the submarine was at relatively close range. You may be noticing something about this tactical plan. It does include the possibility that at the time of fighting the enemy, the Q ship itself may be sinking.
Really?
Yeah, this is what we in the business call foreshadowing.
Huh.
It should be noted that the Navy also did not expect USS Atik or her sister USS Asterion to last longer than a month.
These poor boats just being sent to their deaths.
So the events that I am about to relay um, are going to seem largely single-sided for a reason that will become rapidly evident. At 7:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Navy radio office in Norfolk, Virginia, would receive a distress signal from a cargo ship, which reported that it had been torpedoed, was taking on water, and was on fire.
Oh no.
So, U-boat U-123 had been using the evening hours to cruise on the surface, running its diesel engines and recharging its dive batteries. In the waning light, they had sighted a large, single-funneled cargo ship running in open water with no escorts. From 700 yards, the U-boat fired a single torpedo, which struck the bow of USS Atik. This immediately started a fire on the forward deck, and informed the old steamship that it was in fact time to stop floating.
Oh no.
Atik would broadcast that distress signal at 7:45 that was received by the dispatchers on the US East Coast. This was hopefully to get, like air assets, maybe, a plane or another ship on the way to rescue her. Now, unfortunately, she was broadcasting under her old name, her civilian name, as the Carolyn. This was to preserve the cover of the mission, as they didn't want, the Germans knowing that, like, oh, some of these ships are going to be transmitting under a USS moniker. Um, and of course, nobody in the dispatching office had been told about the Q ship operation as well to maintain its secrecy. So, with assets already stretched thin, literally nobody was sent to aid the Atik.
Oh. So they really were
And
just sent to their deaths.
and for a period, it seemed as though the Navy's tactical assessment was correct. U-123 began to then close in and uh, circle the sinking, burning Atik. Um, you know, not wanting to continue to waste valuable torpedoes on a ship that was notably already sinking and on fire. At this point, the Atik, having gone to the Oliver Hazard Perry School of Naval Warfare, elected to not give up the ship and dropped the disguise, put steam ahead, and proceeded into a parallel course with the submarine. At which point Atik began firing with all guns available.
Oh my
Um,
god.
the crew of the surfaced U-123 noted that the shells were just kind of falling all around them. Because obviously, if you're trying to maintain the disguise, you don't have time to, you don't want to be sitting in open water, dropping, with the gun ports open and firing your weapons to actually train the crew. And of course, this is a cargo ship. It's not the biggest priority for like the top-notch naval crews. Those are all needed in the Pacific. So these were mostly just random yahoos that the Navy had available. The so U-123, now faced with the fact that they were dealing with an actual warship, decided that it was probably better for them to retreat. They began to pour fuel into the diesel engines to produce a smokescreen and retreated. It would be at this point that Atik would score her only kill of the war, as a machine gun round slammed into a German midshipman who was standing on U-123's conning tower, killing the man instantly.
I can only imagine what that man was thinking when he inevitably ended up in hell, thinking I was just killed by by
I
that
was
thing.
killed by a fucking cargo ship. It was at this point that the Navy's assessment was completely disproven. U-123 submerged, came around, and we have the time of 9:30. It's not really clear if this is like 9:30 UTC, 9:30 like Eastern Standard Time, 9:30 German time, because obviously, as I've stated so far, this entire thing is from the U-boat's perspective. Um the this we don't really know,
I guess seeing the
but
number of survivors from the ATIC is not many.
it's a nice. Well, actually, there's still mathematical debate as to whether or not it's an odd or even number. Um, but at this point, U-123 had submerged, came around, and brought the ATIC into her sights and fired a second torpedo because obviously it's not going to keep fighting it out on the surface with a cargo ship that refuses to die.
That'll do it.
The second torpedo would slam into the ATIC amidships inside of her machine spaces. Up to this point, the ATIC had managed to launch a few of its lifeboats, but at 10:50 p.m., either water fully entered the boilers, or the fire finally reached the shell magazines, and ATIC was blown to pieces. Um, I don't believe we actually have a record of where the shipwreck is, which should give an idea of how, the size of pieces that remained of her.
Yeah, she was just what's the word for it? Atomized,
Disintegrated. Atomized, disintegrated.
reduced to ashes.
Yeah. Um, not, some of these lifeboats were close to the ATIC when she exploded and were torn to pieces. Um, what few members of the crew had like abandoned when the fire began, at the start of this engagement, um, would perish when a few hours after the engagement, a torrential squall slammed the area.
Oh God.
So yeah, as I alluded to, the number of survivors from USS Atik was zero. Nobody survived.
All these men died for this.
100 men.
For
A
this.
hundred died.
So when are they going to add the Q ships to World of Warships?
I'm suspecting it'll be an April Fool's Day joke when they finally run out of other ideas.
I hope so.
Uh, the actual sinking of USS Atik would be reported on Radio Berlin on April 9th, with the full details of the engagement only coming out post-war, as the submarine's commander, Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hardigan, would actually survive the war. One of the few U-boat commanders to actually do so.
I hope he's in hell now.
Oh, he's absolutely definitely in hell.
Rotten hell, you
Um,
Nazi fuck.
so her sister, USS Asterion, would push at best possible speeds, but being over 100 miles south and steaming into torrential weather meant that the Asterion would not arrive for several days. Other U.S. Navy ships were dispatched, but would only find some small pieces of floating wreckage. Um, one of the crew members on board, uh, a Ralph Morgan Dietrich of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, would be awarded the Purple Heart for their sacrificing combat.
I guess it's the least you could do.
Yes.
You sent these men to die for absolutely nothing.
Um, Atik's sister, Asterion, would outlive her by several years. Um, she would sail with various Atlantic convoys, but be largely of like no value. Um, she would be taken in for an overhaul in 1943, but following inspections and with the Navy not knowing that it had possibly taken several hours for the ATIC, that it had taken several hours and that the ATIC had put up a fight before sinking, it was deemed unlikely that Asterion would actually survive a single torpedo hit if engaged in combat. Um, Funding would be spent and structural reinforcement would be conducted. Um, but Asterion's days, following that inspection, her days were immediately numbered. The Asterion would end up being transferred to the Coast Guard and given a second refitting. In a bit of unknowing irony, she was redesignated as WAK 123, and her
Ugh.
weapons would be replaced with weather monitoring equipment, the W standing for weather. Ultimately, Asterion was just too far gone for even the Coast Guard. She was noted for being terrible in rough weather, which is kind of not great if your entire job is monitoring the weather. She would be struck from the U.S. Navy's registries in 1944 and ultimately scrapped in 1946.
If it sounds about right.
So, so how do you think that the rest of this program is going to go?
A lot of people are going to die just to be a completely pointless distraction that does not actually benefit the U.S. Navy in any possible way, from what I can tell so far.
Well, for right now, let us bolt some guns to this podcast and venture into the submarine infested waters of the conversation corner.
So, I was showing you this morning. I posted it this morning in our other server. This the world's biggest remote control aircraft. This
Yes, I saw that.
the Airbus A380, and I'm just like, okay, look, I'm not going to judge this man. You know, I'm sure this took a lot of work to make. He looks very proud of it. It's definitely a technological marvel. But at the same time, just buy an actual. I feel like at that point, you maybe just might be time to buy an actual plane.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. I um I think that was my exact comment on that was at
it
this point
was.
just buy a plane.
Like it's the size of like a Cessna.
It's the size of a Cessna. Just buy a Cessna. It was probably
It's probably
I
cheaper.
if you recall our second episode, we asserted that a Cessna is $35,000.
Yeah, it's probably cheaper than this was.
It almost certainly is.
I mean, look, if it makes the man happy, let him have his giant RC plane. But still, I would also like to implore this man, maybe you just need to get an actual plane, a real one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it may be time for just buying an actual plane.
Indeed. Um, so, I'm trying to come up with other things to talk about. Should we have another moment of silence for Spirit Airlines? No, that's a terrible idea.
No. No.
I have been seeing
Oh,
people.
I do have one. I do have one news item. I was going back through our stuff. This when I'm able to do the research into it, and I can once the news cycle settles a bit. But Ernie Dossio, um, he was a 75-year-old vineyard owner from California. Um, I say was because a few weeks back, um, he he was killed
Huh.
by an elephant.
Oh. Oh no.
He was on an antelope hunt in in Africa
But leave those guys.
when
Leave the antelope alone.
yeah, um well he was trying to hunt these antelope, and apparently he managed to just he managed to piss off the elephants because
Huh.
he was in very close proximity to these elephants. I believe that last time I saw reporting on this, five of them trampled him to death.
Oof. That's not a good way to go.
Oh yeah, no, no. But I will say, like, I get that there are occasional legitimate uses for trophy hunting. It's a useful way to cull problem animals, especially ones that are like being violent and like excessively violent by animal standards. But
Yeah.
at this point, when you're the sort of person who has a massive collection of dead animals in your house, I think that maybe you're just tempting fate
I
and
remember
you deserve to be trampled by elephants.
one time I was doing DoorDash and I was doing a delivery. I probably told you about this. I looked through the front window and there were just like dozens and dozens of deer heads just covering every inch of the wall of this man's house. And I was just like,
I will say, to be fair and balanced, TMC and R, um, there is very little else to do in the redacted location.
that is true.
It's the reason I became an Eagle Scout because
Yeah.
there was nothing better to do within the redacted location.
Yeah, that is true. One thing I guess I can talk about is that about a past topic. The NFL draft was 2 weeks ago, and the New York Jets had picked the most players out of any team because I guess they didn't really have a choice. With the second overall pick, they picked a defensive player named David Bailey, and I said they might draft a quarterback. They did draft one with the 110th pick, it looks like. A guy by the name of Cade Klubnik. I have no idea if any of these players are good, but a guy I
I
watch.
swear to God, if Cade Klubnik is not just like a defrosted caveman with like a big wooden stick, I will be severely disappointed.
I guess I think that's kind of what he looks like. I mean, a guy I watch.
Jesus, we just immediately compared a man to a Neanderthal.
I
Cade
mean,
Klubnik, I'm sure you're a wonderful person. If
I,
you're not, unless you're not, in which case,
you deserve it.
the opinions have stopped doing that stand.
I mean, a guy I watch who broke down how all the teams did. He thought the Jets did a really good job in the draft. So good for them. But obviously, we won't know until these players actually, play football. So I guess that's all there
Certainly.
is to say. I guess that's all there is to say about that. Good luck, New York Jets, and good luck to these players now sentenced to the what I can only call the New York torture nexus.
Well, with water coming over the decks and the fire spreading rapidly, let us flee the corner and return to our story. One of the only other Q ships that could be deemed as remotely effective in any capacity would be USS Bighorn, AO-45. This is our fleet oiler. She would be similarly armed to USS Atik and USS Asterion, carrying 5 4-inch guns, a pair of 50 caliber machine guns, and in lieu of the 30 caliber machine guns, was supplied with what on the Wikipedia page is noted as a collection of Thompson submachine guns rated as Tommy guns. So notably, these are the older M1928s or M1921s, which use the drum mags, the
The
gangster ones,
yeah, the funny mob boss ones.
and a collection of sawed-off shotguns. These are noted as sawed-off shotguns, not not just regular shotguns.
They couldn't
But the
afford the
fact that the
barrels.
crew had actually and specifically cut the barrels down, which I'm presuming was for, use if they ever boarded a submarine.
Yeah, the barrels were the barrels. Maybe the barrels are just too expensive. I don't know.
Um, the Bighorn would spend her wartime career working with the convoys. She would sail with numerous convoys, but unlike unlike the ATIC, would never actually engage a submarine in combat. She would mostly just use her onboard submarine detection systems to like find the submarines and then dispatch escorting submarine chasers to hunt down those targets. This operational tempo would continue until the end of 1943, at which point USS Bighorn would be sent back to New London, Connecticut, where all of these ships had been overhauled to rejoin USS Asterion, wherein she would be given the same role as a Coast Guard weather monitoring vessel. The Bighorn would be then pulled from the Weather Patrol in 1945 and transferred to the Pacific Theater. The big tanker was really like it was desperately needed more for its ability to actually like ferry fuel across the Pacific, and she would spend the rest of the war and the early post-war period shuttling fuel across the Pacific to various U.S. Navy bases. I believe she was then to sold into civilian service and would eventually I was either sunk or scrapped. The next ship to see the average service of little to do would be USS Captor. That is PYC 40. So this is our yard patrol vessel, which due to her size was certainly the least Q of the Q ships. Originally constructed as the trawler Harvard in 1938, she was the newest of the vessels used in the Q ship program. That's a photo of her there in the notes. It's unclear as to whether this is a pre-war, during war, or post-war photo of her. I believe that this may be post-war, but she would be purchased in 1942, like the rest of the ships, and would be initially outfitted as the minesweeper USS Eagle, that is AM 132. But given that there weren't, massive enemy minefields on the coast of the United States that needed clearing, she was renamed Captor and outfitted for Q ship duty. At 133 feet long, however, she was not, going to be armed for like the convoy patrols that the other big ships would be given, with just a single 4-inch gun as a primary weapon and a few machine guns here and there. Captor was not expected to be doing this. Yeah, the big transatlantic routes. Instead, Naval Command feared that German submarines may attempt to attack the Boston trawler fleets. Just hear them out. Just hear them out. The Germans might attack the Atlantic trawlers based in Boston. Frankly, I would fear for the Germans more if they had to deal with Boston people.
That is
If
true.
Boston people sail anything like how they drive, then the Germans would be in for a hell of it.
I recall that the an English teacher I had at our high school, you had him too, actually, at some point. He
Oh yes,
said,
redacted high school.
yeah, that yes, the good old redacted high. He said that he never heard the N word used so much as he heard it used in Boston. He said it was like the most racist place he'd ever been in his life.
Well, I will say I do know one Boston person. Um, and she was an absolutely lovely person to work with.
Yeah, obviously, I'm sure there's some good there are some good people in
There's
Boston.
there are there are fine people on both sides of the river in Boston.
Indeed. I will say also the captor, this looks like a ship that if this gets hit by a torpedo, it is going to just simply
Oh yeah, no, it
disappear
would have
from
ceased
existence.
to exist.
Yeah.
Um, but with this perceived threat, Captor would move up and down the Atlantic coast with the trawlers and sort of acting as a roving escort. This did also help to cover some of the convoy routes, especially like the staging areas on the U.S. East Coast. Um, but realistically, Captor was not doing anything of value. And her role was rapidly overtaken as the U.S. war machine began to churn out heavy bombers at a rate not seen, before or since.
I feel like for this
With
sort of role, you would want to pick ships that, are like really big, maybe? Like, just,
Well, realistically, more you want ships that are very fast. You want ships that can be rapidly responding to threats, which is generally not the case when, well, as I note here, Captor had a top speed of 12 and a half knots, which is like, the average non-highway speed within the redacted area is like 25 miles an hour.
yeah.
That's pretty close. That's not breaking that speed limit, I don't think. With the long range bombers now able to cover captors patrol areas, and especially bringing to bear far greater firepower than a one trawler with a 4-inch gun mounted to it. Captor was decommissioned in October of 1944, and after the war would be placed back onto the civilian market for sale. She would be bought up as a trawler again in 1959. Um, well, she was bought up as a trawler after the war. In 1959, was renamed to the Wave, and in 2005 was returned to the original name of Harvard. But any record of her existence only extends up to about 2009, at which point she disappears from naval registers. Um, so she's either tied up in a port somewhere, or she sank for some reason, or she was scrapped.
Or she's just sitting like some local museum just doing nothing?
No. If it was in a museum, then there would be record of it.
Yeah,
There
I
would
mean, I
almost certainly
guess.
be record that she had been purchased
I
by a
mean,
museum.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess.
The submarine threat was not only in the Atlantic. There was some threat to the Pacific as well, especially following the February 1942 shelling of the Elwood oil fields in Santa Barbara, California. This was conducted by the Japanese submarine I-17. And to combat this threat, the Navy authorized the conversion of one cargo ship as a Q ship. This honor would be given to the timber freighter Coos Bay, which would be renamed as USS Anacapa, thus AG-49. Fitted with a pair of 4-inch guns and a pair of 3-inch guns, she was a match for a surfaced submarine. And unlike the open ocean Atlantic freighters, Anacapa had a shallow, flat bottom. This made her absolutely phenomenal on the rivers of Oregon, absolutely miserable in rough ocean swells, and if attacked, potentially harder to torpedo. This is just because of that shallow draft. And the way a torpedo attack happened in that era was either that it would directly impact the target well below the waterline, which made a big hole that was hard to plug, or the torpedo would run under the ship's keel and explode, which would buckle the ship in two and sink it faster. But this very shallow draft for a ship of its size meant that if the submarine captain misjudged the potential depth for an attack, the torpedo may just run straight under just straight under the Anacapa. But we never know. Well, we will never know because of her wartime service.
Oh
Um,
no.
Japanese submarines did make further direct attacks on U.S. shipping along the coasts, as well as other U.S. towns. There was some minor shelling of shore targets, um, notably, and I bring this up as it is further part of our story. The city of Astoria, Oregon, would be shelled by a Japanese submarine and would be bombed by the small float planes that some Japanese submarines were able to carry. These attacks by the Japanese were largely ineffective, and the Anacapa was never in a position to actually entice attacks on herself, though she would end up saving the crew of the tanker Larry Doheny? Eh. Dohney, I believe it is Doheny. Um, after that tanker had been attacked. If anything, the USS Anacapa and her status as a secret weapon was more of a nuisance than anything. On one attack, it is believed that she attempted that on one occasion it is believed that she attempted a depth charge attack against two American submarines, which were operating in her patrol sector, likely because no one had mentioned to the submarine commanders that there was a Q ship in the area, or that they might want to avoid the areas along the coast for training cruises and the like. Albert Wright, the Anacapa's longest serving commander, would also recall several occasions in which patrolling coastal submarine chasers ended up ordering the Anacapa to follow them to the nearest safe harbor because, again, no one told the submarine chasers that there was a Q ship on patrol. Notably, this does mean that the Anacapa may have run into, as I mentioned during our last episode, um, a good friend of ours, a good friend of everyone's. He brings the good news about Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard.
Yo!
It is noted that L. Ron Hubbard was commander of a submarine chaser, notably placed in Astoria, Oregon, following the shelling. So it is entirely possible that the Anacapa was flagged down and ordered to return to port by L. Ron Hubbard, which
Oh,
makes it
God.
all the funnier that um when when each time that they would be like flagged down and ordered to return to port out of these unsafe waters, Wright notes that each time this would happen, the Anacapa would wait until nightfall and just slip away from the submarine chaser, never to return.
I mean, what else do you do?
They just left the submarine chaser behind and went back to their patrol duties. Commander Wright did note in his logs that he does hope that none of the commanding officers on these submarine chasers were too hard on the watch officer for letting the Anacapa get away.
Ugh, what a mess.
Um, like like the Atlantic Q ships, in 1943, Anacapa was pulled from Q ship duties and would be used as an oceanic freighter for the rest of the war. The transit across the Atlantic must have been absolutely miserable, given her low her shallow draft and flat bottom, which just makes those ocean currents absolutely miserable. But she would actually see a lot of good use during the rest of the war. Um, that shallow draft was again a blessing, as following landings by the United States Marines, she was frequently like one of the few ships actually capable of like dashing into the beachheads where the Marines had cleared and delivering supplies without needing to wait for the Marines to capture like an actual port on the island. And she would remain this way for the rest of the war. Post-war, she would be sold back to civilians, and again returned as a timber freighter until she sank in a river, um, in I believe the 1950s.
So as I'm understanding, like the bottom of this ship, like nothing extends below the water. It's just like completely smooth and
Um,
sits like on top of the water.
so I mean, you've seen something like a John boat, right? Um, there's part of it that extends below the waterline, but it's not much, and the entire bottom of it is flat. It
Yeah,
doesn't curve in to form a keel like like larger power boats.
it's the kind of boat that Phil Swift cut in half.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Or that he would fix with a screen door.
yeah, exactly.
We have one more ship, and I have saved what I believe to be the truly worst for last. The USS Irene Foresight. Um, the Irene Foresight was the last sailing ship given an explicit combat role. She is not the last sailing ship to see combat. That actually happened during World War One, and that's going to be an episode because it is one of my favorite stories of all time.
I can see why a sailboat or sail ship would not be the most effective thing for combat.
Yes, but trust me, um, when when I get to talk about uh, Count Felix von Luckner, uh, I we're gonna it's gonna be a multi-part episode, and I'm going to be gushing over every single part of it, because
Fantastic.
he was a guy.
He was a dude, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah. Um, and Um, these days, there are, like I said, she's the last sailing vessel given an explicit combat role. These days, there are a number of sailing ships still on the naval registers, notably like HMS Victory is actually still a vessel of the Royal Navy. She's still considered on the registers. I believe the same goes for USS Constitution, though they are museum ships. There are also a number of them as like training vessels, notably the U.S. Coast Guard's USCGC Eagle, um, which, believe it or not, was at one point Hermann Goering's private yacht.
Oh
We
god.
just stole it. Yeah, yeah, the US Coast Guard's pride and joy is an ex-Nazi ship, which honestly I think that's just fine. And we are perfectly within our rights to do that.
Yeah, I see these kinds of boats very occasionally on the redacted body of water that we live near, the very large body of water. Uh,
Yes. Notably, this is also you know, these sorts of training ships are also like the one from the Mexican Navy that New York City Mayor Eric Adams selfishly destroyed by placing the Brooklyn Bridge in its way.
yeah.
To all of that, all of that, the foresight has little role to play in any of
I'm looking at a
that.
picture of the Foresight, and it looks like if you breathe on this thing wrong, it will turn to dust.
Keep that in mind. Built originally as the McLean Clan, she's a three-masted schooner built for coastal and oceanic routes. Um, in December of 1942, she would be the last of the vessels purchased for the Q ship program for a price of some $12,000. This is about $300,000 in today's money, and refitted for one final go of the Q ship program. Um, while many of these other vessels would be turned around within a few months, notably, like I had mentioned, the ATIC, it began service. It was purchased in the beginning of 1942 and was turned around and sunk by March. While many of these vessels were turned around very quickly, the Foresight's conversion dragged for a long time, with most of the other Q ships actually being pulled from duty by the time the Foresight was finished. It would not be until August of 1943 that the USS Irene Foresight would be released from outfitting, fitted with a single 4-inch gun and one 40 millimeter cannon as her heavy armament. That is a 40 millimeter automatic cannon. Um, the U.S. Navy's Bofors L-60 gun, the classic of World War II.
I'm feeling a great
And
sense of dread.
keep holding on to it, because notably, one of the things that had to be fitted during her conversion was a new engine, because during her purchase, it had been noted that the one she'd been built with was beyond its last legs.
I feel like the fact that I didn't see any modern pictures of this boat is not a good sign of where this is going.
And keep holding on to that feeling. Keep that sense of dread. Um, with with the Atlantic seaboard threat mostly concluded by the arrival of coastal bomber squadrons for anti-submarine patrols, the Navy planned to send the Irene Foresight to what is known as the Trinidad Corner, an area in the Caribbean off the island of Trinidad. Um, for anyone besides the two of us who were perhaps any other students from the redacted location middle school may recall the book The K, the story of a young man named Timothy, who does a racism, and this gets the ship that he's on torpedoed by the Nazis, and thus he is forced to live on a deserted island with a black man named Philip, and just all of that,
I liked
all of that,
Philip. I liked Philip a
that book.
lot.
It's that book. It's that broader geographic area, as described in the book, which is where they wanted to send the Foresight.
I liked Philip. He seemed like a really cool guy. It's a shame that he
He
had to
died in a hurricane.
yeah he had to die in a horrible
Well,
storm.
hang on to the hurricane.
Oh no!
I know I've asked you to hang on to a lot of things right now,
This
but
poor
hang on to the
boat.
hurricane as well.
This poor fucking boat is just gonna get completely atomized.
Under the command of Lieutenant Commander, I believe it's Ronald, either Ronald or Robert, uh, Lieutenant Commander Parmenter, as I will be referring to him, thus just going on. The Irene Foresight was sent southwards, flying a Portuguese flag and impersonating a fishing trawler, because apparently they just wanted to do a false flag and get the Portuguese involved somehow. Um, and at this point, I did ask you to hold on to that hurricane. Well, it would be at this point that nature would attempt to tell Parmenter and the Foresight that it was time to stop, as a massive Atlantic storm swiftly overtook the Irene Foresight, and it was incredibly bad. Not, I mean, for most ships going in the area, it was bad. But for a small three-masted schooner, this could have been the apocalypse. The Foresight's bilge pumps were barely able to keep ahead of the flooding, and it would only be by pulling into the main harbor in Bermuda that she would survive. Um, Commander Parmenter would radio to the U.S. Navy to note the extensive damage to the Foresight, and the Navy would initially attempt to dispatch two tugboats to save the floundering Foresight, but Parmenter, being being a man in the 1940s and not needing any assistance from anyone else,
Certainly not
would
the
state
government.
that no assistance was required and that they could repair the ship on their own.
No, don't just let this poor boat rest.
For several weeks following the storm, the Irene Foresight would stay in Bermuda where it would be repaired until it was safe enough for her to sail in good weather.
It feels just so. Thank God boats are not sentient beings, because this would just be completely and utterly horrific.
I don't know. I don't know. Have you watched cinematic masterpiece Cars 2?
Oh God. Can you imagine? Imagine it would just be this boat just screaming, "Please kill me," as they just say, "No, you're going to go back out there and you're going to distract the Germans."
Well, with repairs effected, Parmenter requested that he be permitted to resume the anti-submarine cruise. At this point, the Navy said no. Parmenter was denied because the project had finally come under the scrutiny of higher brass within the USN. Up until this point, they had largely been allowed to just operate with whatever impunity they wanted and just spend money because it was going to the war effort. The the Admiralty now realized. I should note, um, he's going to come up in a bit, but at the start of the war, Admiral Ernest J. King had asked the Atlantic Command to consider the idea of Q ships. Note the use of the word consider. He gave them room to say no, to say that this was a dumb idea. And now all of this episode has
I just mean like, just I would just, oh my god.
happened. Yes, you have to be the person sitting in the chair at U.S. Atlantic Command who sees the word consider and thinks it means build and not no.
Oh
So
god.
at this point, with admirals breathing down their neck, the Irene Foresight would be turned over to the United States Merchant Marine. These are, civilian sailors in government employ, as the Merchant Marine Cadet Corps training ship. Because if it killed a bunch of children, then it would be much less of a loss.
I mean, at least they didn't send it out to get sunk by a German U-boat, because if a single torpedo even just touched that ship, I don't even.
Yeah, like the captor, it would just be vaporized if it were actually attacked. Um,
Ironically, though, for the
that
boat,
is that is actually notably, if she was even capable of keeping up with a U-boat in the first place. I
yeah.
didn't mention this earlier, but uh, on the surface, a U-boat could make like 12 to 15 knots. They weren't, quick, but they also weren't slow. It could break the speed limit on some roads. I'm not sure the Foresight could do that. I'm not even sure the Foresight could match the underwater speeds, like 7 to 9 knots of some of those U-boats. I'm pretty sure it would just be left behind.
If it were possible to walk on water, you could probably keep up with it just by briskly, not even jogging, just walking slightly fast.
Yeah. Well, so as I said, the brass now had a real interest in the Foresight and the Q-ship program. In fact, as I said, it had managed to reattract the interest of Ernest J. King, the overall commander of the entire United States Navy. Do you know how bad you have to fuck up to get the attention of the overall commander of the United States Navy? You
I
have to
must,
screw up as badly as L. Ron Hubbard did during the war.
yeah.
Because, notably, this is also the man who had to write of L. Ron Hubbard that he should not be permitted an independent command for the rest of the war, following an event where L. Ron Hubbard shelled Mexico.
Ah, yes, the William Walker approach.
For more, if you're interested more in the absolute nonsense that Hubbard was up to during the war, I absolutely recommend the Lines Led by Donkeys episode on L. Ron Hubbard. It is hilarious. But he noted, Admiral King noted that the United States Navy had built six Q ships, and every single one of them was a failure. One of them had managed to kill their crew, several had tried to kill their allies, and one had angered the gods of the natural world. In a report on the Irene Foresight and the Q ship program as a whole, Admiral King said the following: "The conversion of USS Irene Foresight is an instance of misguided conception and misdirected zeal, which, coupled with inefficiency resulting from lack of supervision by competent authority, has cost the government nearly $500,000 in money and a serious waste of effort. In addition, much valuable material that can ultimately be used has been frozen for the better part of 1 year." And on the independently pursued Q-ship program, he said, "The practice of granting frontier commanders and district commandants uncontrolled authority to implement projects of this nature has been discontinued."
Basically, the very professional equivalent of saying, "What the fuck are you morons doing?"
Yeah, suffice to say that Admiral King was exceedingly unhappy that guns, steel, and wood pulp had been wasted on a program which ultimately ended up killing more Americans than Germans or Japanese. All of the Q ships that survived the war and did return to civilian operate no, all the Q ships that survived the war did return to civilian operations, where they would end up either being sunk or scrapped. But this is not the true end of the Q ship as an idea. It has been floated several times as a way of combating modern piracy. I will, take a stand as, truly the Admiral King of the modern age.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say no. Don't do that. The one effect of Q ship operations in the First World War was that submarines increasingly acted on a shoot first and interrogate the survivors methodology, and fitting modern cargo ships with large caliber weapons would do the same thing for modern piracy.
Yeah,
This is
probably.
an idea that just needs to die.
Although, I think what we should do is we should go down to Washington, go to Mr. Trump and tell him I get a great idea. It's going to turn the tide in the war with Iran.
If I show up in Pete Hegseth's office with like a case of Jack Daniels, I think he'll let me strap some guns to a cargo ship.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
I claim that I can use it to fight Iran, he will give me the money for
It probably will.
it. From this, hopefully we will never see this idea again. But what we can expect is that I will have more naval nonsense to cover, because this is but a tasting of the absolute nonsense that the navies of the world permit themselves to get up to. You can look forward, as I mentioned, there will be an episode on Count Felix von Luckner. Um, I won't spoil it, but there is a reason why he is known as the Kaiser's pirate. Um, and that's going to be a real special episode.
John.
As we round this out, do you have any some hints or ideas on like what our next episode will entail?
Well, I will say very briefly, very briefly, we are going to be back in New York. Not for very long,
Oh
just a
boy.
taste. And we're going to be talking about Christianity.
Oh no.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Christianity and certain people within it that really, really, really need to stop doing a particular thing.
Oh,
Don't
I
worry,
really hope that you're not going there, are you?
it's not gonna, it doesn't involve bigotry. I'll say that. Doesn't involve any bigotry.
That's not what I would
But,
have been fine if we were talking about bigotry.
well,
Oh no, please tell me we're not going there.
depends on what there is. You'll just have to find out
Oh.
on the next episode of Stop Doing That.